Welcome all, and thanks for listening. This screen shows the cover slide, the first of 14 slides. There is a picture of two Filipinos with disabilities moving through a street. The previous videos showed the context of migration and disability, whereas this presentation aims to show an overview of the current evidence regarding migrants with disabilities and provides this by using a Filipino case study. It is split into three sections: a review of the literature, evidence from a key informant interview with persons with disabilities themselves, and to see the current state of governance and if it is disability sensitive. Slide 2 of 14, and it's the first of 4 slides from the literature review. The review showed that the empirical reality for persons with disabilities in migration is unclear due to the lack of data and evidence. However, information indicates that persons with disabilities face disadvantage moving across borders. Persons with disabilities have had little international labour migration attention, representation, and inclusion, and processes such as disability responsiveness have not had the same level of influence within the migration discourse compared to the development one, even though the nexus of migration and development is ever growing. Though the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, provide specific related disability and migration goals, they remain largely separate issues. Slide 3 of 14, and is a second of 4 slides on the literature review. The bulk of the contemporary disability studies have focused on forced migration and refugees. The Migration Data Portal, MDP, reveals that no official international statistics exist on the global prevalence of disability within the persons on the move population, though in 2020 it was approximated that globally there are 12.4 million persons with disabilities who have been forcibly displaced out of the 82.4 million total. Unfortunately, there is no data or estimates on labour migrants with disabilities, which is a disastrous situation considering that it is recognised as a population international labour migrants experience marginalisation and discrimination, which is likely further compounded by the challenges created by the treatment of society towards persons with disabilities, such as discrimination and harassment. Exacerbating this is the very real possibility that persons with disabilities are getting bottlenecked in their pursuit to even become migrants due to environmental, attitudinal, and institutional barriers, which remain undocumented and brushed aside into the migration and disability discourse ether. Slide 4 of 14, and is the third of 4 slides on the literature review. The modest amount of research currently available surrounding disability and migration has a consensus view of exclusion and marginalization. Looking more broadly at forced migration/humanitarian discourse, which provides more literature, research shows it is clear that both the literature and praxis are premised upon adopting an ableist approach that neglects other body forms. Further, countries have expanded disability exclusion procedures to include, quote, a range of tactics, including refugee and asylum selection status determination processes that work to actively screen out persons with disabilities for refugee status or resettlement. In labour migration and disability studies, evidence outlined the inequality of opportunity for persons with disabilities. This includes their legislative exclusion, lack of representation, and the denial of access based on grounds of health that follows a medical model narrative. This is aggravated with barriers constructed in countries like the UK, Canada, Australia, and Malaysia, who put restrictions on Article 18 of the CRPD, with only citizens being covered. Internally to the Philippines, the Philippine Commission on the CRPD provide evidence about the status of the implementation of the CRPD and stated that regarding Article 18, the liberty of movement and nationality, that they have found violations. For example, reports were made of persons with disabilities being barred by the Bureau of Immigration at airports due to their disability, even on the day of their flights, with airlines facing no repercussions. Slide 5 of 14, and is the fourth of 4 slides on the literature review. One example is in Canada. As mentioned, migrants with disabilities often encounter and experience difficulties associated with the social, environmental, and political barriers societies create and impose onto them. This adds up to the already existing challenges of any stigma surrounding disability. This difficulty began for migrants with disabilities immigrating into Canada in the early 1900s, where migration officers were allowed to deport migrants they considered, quote, lunatic, idiotic, deaf and dumb, blind, or infirm, if the migrants did not have family members who could take responsibility for all their needs. Today, Canada's immigration system still discriminates as persons with disabilities who are banned from emigrating into Canada if the Canadian government thinks their disability would cause excessive demand on the healthcare or social services systems in Canada. Here, excessive demand is defined in terms of cost and burden. It is established that if a potential newcomer might cost more than $24,000 per year in health and or in social services. This also includes a demand on health services or social services that would add to existing waiting lists and would increase the rate of mortality and morbidity in Canada as a result of inability to provide timely services to Canadian citizens or permanent residents. Slide 6 of 14, and it's the first of 4 slides on the evidence directly from persons with disabilities. Having interviewed persons with disabilities from the Philippines to see what common experiences they shared in relation to migration, and for them trying to become or being overseas Filipino workers, OFWs. The themes that emerged are, firstly, around their perceived identity. There are unique concerns for persons with disabilities regarding their identity, which impacts elements of their aspirations to become an OFW. For instance, the lack of information on assistive devices and the idea of living alone were major considerations for one person that would need addressing as it would impact on their independence. They said, I couldn't imagine myself living all alone. Although I am very independent, I still live with my mum and I couldn't imagine doing all these things all alone, taking care of everything by myself in a different place, in a different culture. For another participant, becoming an OFW was a childhood dream, but their aspirations evaporated when they acquired their disability, as they believed that it was not possible for persons with disabilities to become an OFW, as they had never seen or heard of a circumstance like this and if it could happen. They said, I know that I cannot work abroad. It was my childhood dream to be an OFW, as an engineer actually, but when I acquired my disability, I said it's not possible for me. I do not even know if I can find a job here in the Philippines, because I do not know any person. I do not know of any story or person like me who uses a wheelchair who is abroad. Slides 7 and 14, and it's the second of 4 slides on the evidence directly from persons with disabilities. Institutional barriers. Different institutional barriers emerged from the conversations, such as the importance and influence that hiring agencies have on whether persons with disabilities can migrate. There are examples of hiring agencies both constructing and dismantling governance barriers. On the negative side, a participant experienced firsthand the construction of barriers by hiring agents, where the reason they were rejected was because they were a wheelchair user, and the agent stated directly that they did not hire persons with disabilities. The participant said, I worked for this company for around 5 years. After 3 years of working, I observed that my co-workers are leaving the company to work abroad. Of course, I am happy that they will be working abroad because the salary abroad is much higher than the salary here in the Philippines. As years passed, by the 3rd year or 4th year, more engineers were leaving the company. But one time, because there were only a few engineers in the office, I had to answer a lot of phone calls. This one, I was speaking to this job placement agency, and I was being asked about my work background. And then I was asked if I was interested in working abroad. Of course, at the time, I was surprised hearing this, actually, answering the call and being offered to work abroad at that very moment. I never had any idea that this was possible for me to work abroad because I'm a wheelchair user. So I asked the phone caller if they accepted people who uses wheelchairs to work abroad, and immediately the caller said to me, I am very sorry, I do not think that is possible, and she hung up soon after. The recruiter said we do not hire people with disabilities or something like that. That is what I remember. Nevertheless, on the positive side, 2 examples emerged. Firstly, a hiring agency aided a deaf participant all the way through the migration process, from processing documents to the mandatory medical being waived. Another example occurred during a participant's medical exam in the Philippines prior to them having a disability. The medical exam was used to try and deny them access to work abroad. However, the hiring agency fixed the situation, which ultimately allowed them to migrate. Slide 8 of 14, and is the third of 4 slides on the evidence directly from persons with disabilities. Additional institutional discrimination was evident in the Philippines' governance of migration, as a participant commented on their problems with the BOI, the Bureau of Immigration, as they believed that persons with disabilities cannot migrate to other countries, and again, the hiring agency helped support overcome these barriers. The participant said, when I was almost going to go to Qatar, they, the BOI, kept telling me that I cannot go there because I am deaf. I told them I have a friend there who will train me in my work. BOI are inventing some things, excuses why I cannot go. The agency is the one that helped me. Additionally, to these points, airports and travel in general were identified as barriers, which is consistent with the finding from the Philippines Commission on the CRPD report. For instance, on returning to Qatar after a holiday in the Philippines, our participant got sent to immigration officers in the airport as they believed someone in a wheelchair could not work abroad. Slide 9 of 14, and it's the 4th of 4 slides on the evidence directly from persons with disabilities. Finally, the medicalization of disability. This can have serious consequences as it incentivizes persons to try and conceal their disability or health condition. Our participant talked about their father who was a victim of this and even died abroad because they felt forced to conceal their disability health issue. The participant said their father was a career OFW and had passed away whilst working abroad in the early 1980s. He was an electrician, but contracted meningitis later in life, and after contracting meningitis was susceptible to having seizures. The father never declared this, but occasionally having seizures at work led to him being discharged from multiple jobs and sent back to the Philippines. He would then look for a new opportunity to work abroad again. During his final deployment, he had a seizure and was admitted to hospital. And as no one knew his underlying health condition, he unfortunately passed away after being misdiagnosed with his condition, and in doing so provided the wrong treatment when he was unconscious and unable to provide the relevant information. After becoming conscious again and having his pancreas removed, he died shortly after. This all came about as he was fearful to disclose his disability, as he would not have been able to work abroad and provide for his family. Additionally, the health certificate was mentioned by a participant that this experience caused stress, and the cost of the medical examination prevented them from applying to become an OFW again, since even when they had a waiver from their previous organization abroad, they still got turned down. Slide 10 of 14, there is one stacked Venn diagram with 4 circles showing migration actors at different governance levels. This is the first of 4 slides on the evidence surrounding migration governance and its disability sensitivity. This slide was designed to show the evidence on how inclusion and representation currently operate in migration mechanisms. Firstly, at the global level, the conception of the GCM, the Global Compact of Migration. As mentioned in my other video, the GCM covers all dimensions of international migration, having been designed on the values of non-discrimination and human rights, amongst others. Its foundations rest on human rights instruments, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other treaties, even the CRPD. The GCM consists of 23 objectives to manage migration. Overall, disability as a concept was positioned in a way that mitigates persons with disabilities' vulnerabilities, as the GCM focuses on protection rather than empowerment. For instance, disability was only explicitly mentioned in the following 3 objectives. Objective 7, which aimed to address and reduce vulnerabilities in migration. The objective was not to increase the vulnerabilities of migrants in the establishment of relevant policies and practices by applying a human rights and disability responsive approach. Objective 15, establish comprehensive policies and develop partnerships. This objective aims to grant migrants access to basic and safe services at the local level that are a disability responsive manner. Objective 20 is to promote faster, safer, and cheaper transfer of remittances and foster financial inclusion of migrants. So in innovating remittance technology, money can be transferred more cheaply to underserved populations like persons with disabilities. Unfortunately, disability was not mentioned in 2 other objectives, which are very relevant to disability responsiveness. Firstly, Objective 1, which is to collect and utilize accurate and disaggregated data as a basis for evidence-based policies. Disability was not mentioned as a necessary disaggregated data category. And also Objective 6, to facilitate fair and ethical recruitment and safeguard conditions that ensure decent work. Thus, currently, mechanisms around focusing on fair and ethical recruitment are not having to be done in a disability-responsive manner. Slide 11 and 14 continues with the stacked Venn diagram. This is the second of 4 slides on the evidence surrounding migration governance and its disability sensitivity. The second level, which the global narrative passes down to, is the regional mechanisms. For instance, within ASEAN, which is predicted to transform into a labour migration hub, and building on the Cebu Declaration, which is mentioned in my other video, and the AFML, which is an annual ASEAN forum on migration. Dissecting this forum, which has multiple representatives and examines articles and drafts and agree on new recommendations. As of the 14th conference in 2022, there has been no representation from a disability civil society organization. In AFML 7, when deciding on data disaggregation, disability was not considered an area needed. Recommendations that have mentioned disability throughout all AMFLs focus on benefits and insurance schemes, access to occupational safety and health to protect migrant workers resulting from injuries at work or occupational disease, social economic reintegration for returning migrant workers with disabilities, or is listed as a category for non-discrimination or as a vulnerable population. These examples again show that persons with disabilities are still objects of entitlements, as support is tailored around their medical issues. Slide 12 of 14, continuing with the stacked Venn diagram. This is the third of 4 slides on the evidence surrounding migration governance and its disability sensitivity. Thirdly, moving on from the regional to the national level, the Philippine Development Plan from 2017 to 2022, disability was specifically mentioned in the legislative agenda in 2 out of 3 committees or subcommittees that the NCDA, the National Council on Disability Affairs, were on, but it mentioned 0 out of the other 31 legislative agendas that the NCDA were not on, showing why representation is so important. Conversely, concerning migration and disability, which historically were seen as largely separate issues, there has been increased activity and the thematic convergence within the Philippine Development Plan, giving special attention to OFWs, overseas Filipino workers, and their families, with strong representation on committees and subcommittees with actors incorporated to multiple agendas. However, disability and migration, like in the Sustainable Development Goals, remain separate issues. Slide 13 of 14, which continues with the stacked Venn diagram, is the 4th of 4 slides of evidence surrounding migration governance and its disability sensitivity. Finally, at the local level, where disability and migration intersect from bottom up in civil society organizations. Migration-focused CSOs rarely mention disability. For instance, out of the 119 CSOs represented by larger regional organization entities at the AMFL, only 2 of them explicitly mentioned disability, and both comments were outside the context of migration. However, there was lobbying from CSOs focusing on rights when migrant workers obtained some sort of disability whilst working abroad. Furthermore, from my knowledge, no OPDs concentrate on lobbying around migration issues. Slide 14 of 14, text only. Thank you for listening. For more information, please check out our other videos or get in contact with us by either email at disabilitymigrationnetwork@gmail.com or on Facebook at www.facebook.com/disabilitymigrationnetwork.